We're going to take questions, ideally questions rather than comments. Very brief comments are allowed, I gather, but questions preferred. And we'll take them in groups of about 3. If you'd like to put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question, and I will allow the panel to respond to whichever ones they feel they are qualified to respond to and have something interesting to say to. So.
My name's Gareth. I'm the director of the Conservative Party's Christian Fellowship. I heard a slight hint maybe that Conservative Party policies maybe weren't as popular on the panel as maybe they could have been. So just a gentle pushback. Which of your solutions would not involve more state spending? And is governments running a deficit and a debt into the immeasurable future, could that be perceived as a tax on your children and maybe even your grandchildren? And you're asking them to pay, our children to pay, for your comfort now.
Hi, thanks for your presentations, really interesting. I wanted to ask you for your comments.
I can't hear you.
Sorry. Hold it further away?
Yeah.
Better?
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentations, really interesting concepts. I wanted to ask you for your comments on the implications of people choosing not to marry and people choosing to have children by themselves, so choice of single-parent families.
Hello, my name's Robert. I work for Bright Blue, the Liberal Conservative think tank. My question kind of comes off the back of Al's points at the end about it takes a village, and my thoughts and maybe my concerns are that what about those communities where they don't feel like a village, in fact where the interaction between neighbours, the trust, the awareness is so low, and why may that be? What can we do to build up kind of a village where then reliance and support can increase? And if there's some responsibility across 100 years, and it's a big thing, of the kind of growth of the welfare state and the economic theory crowding out, is the welfare state replacing kind of I'm not suggesting it's just, I would like an answer, welfare state replacing the pressure or the impetus on a family or a community to provide that? I'd love to hear.
Thank you. And perhaps we'll allow each panellist to respond in turn, and then we'll go the other way next time. So, Philip, do you want to begin?
Which of your solutions would not involve spending? I don't think I've ever come up with a solution to any problem which involves more government spending. So maybe that wasn't directed at me. But let me make 2 points which I think would make are really pertinent to this question. And they're government policies which would make a big difference. One of them is government policy which would make a big difference and wouldn't involve more government spending. Cathy talked about rent control. Very difficult to find any economist to approve of rent control. It tends to have disastrous effects on rented housing. Rent control, yeah. Disastrous effects on rented housing markets. The key difference between our housing market and that in every other Western country, more or less, other than Australia, is that we have very tight planning laws, so it's not possible to build houses. As a result of that, house prices and rents as well are probably about twice the level they otherwise would be. And for a less well-off person, that probably reduces their disposable income by more than 25%. That's one policy which would do more than any other set of government policies that you can imagine that involve spending money, which would transform the lives not just of poor people, but lots of other people as well. It would also reduce taxes, because it would reduce the housing benefit bill, etc., etc., etc. There is an issue, I think, with the balance of austerity, if you want to call it austerity, but the actual drop in government spending has been virtually zero in total. But when government spending has been cut, it's tended to have been cut on benefits for working families with children, whilst other benefits have not only been protected, but in terms of pensioner benefits actually have increased rather more rapidly than inflation. Now, let me miss out the middle question, if I may. I do have views about it. Well, I suppose my talk was really my views about that. We should stop discriminating against family formation. And I think you tend to find that in a neutral situation, most people actually want to have families with the two parents living together. And we should move to a fiscal system which doesn't penalise that arrangement. The question about, if you like, degraded communities. We also have, as well as a uniquely dysfunctional land use planning system, a uniquely centralised state in the UK, with a very small proportion of tax revenues collected by local government and quite a small proportion of total government spending by local government. And I think if we decentralised and localised government spending and taxation more, it would help the development of communities of the type you speak of.
I'm also not going to give a very long answer because is it about spending more government money? No, it's about prioritising and redistribution of priorities within government spending, which is away from the kind of people I work with and to people who actually can afford things. So when you talk, I didn't actually use the word rent control. I carefully didn't say control. I was talking about rent regulation, which there's a lot more to it, as you know, than controlling private landlords and how much they charge. And I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand your point about the welfare state. The best response I can give to that was the list that I excluded from my talk, which is the work that the churches and other like-minded organisations and charities and their members do. And with the members, it's their time, it's their money, it's their skills, it's their commitment. So no, I think it's a case of working alongside and with. I don't see the welfare state as being the problem in that. I see the policies of government being the problem in potentially setting people up against their neighbours.
Thank you. Don't feel you need to respond to all three, but if there's ones that you would like to take up.
I'll try and avoid the economic questions for those that are a bit more intelligent than I am. But only to say that I think I agree with Kathy. It is perhaps about priorities. If we believe that family breakdown costs the state £51 billion every year, that's more than the defence budget. Then I wonder, have we got the priorities right in terms of the balance of spending then on family support? Where's the investor save courage of politicians to say, actually, this could, over the long term, be beneficial economically for families if we invest now? So that's my only comment on that. I think in the question of single parents, I suppose I'd go back to what Al was saying about what do children need, and they need a loving and secure environment. And I think so that there's full stop. And I deliberately avoided, I guess, getting into the marriage debate in my talk. But what I've noticed is that the couple relationship, which was the point I was particularly making, gets lost. We tend to talk about family because that's easier, and I think we lose something of the uniqueness that couples can bring to the table. And I think we just need to recognise that, not to say that one is better than the other for children, because if children can find a secure and loving environment, then that's what matters the most for them. That would be mine.
Yes, thank you. I liked your very first point about a tax on our grandchildren. You're absolutely right. We are leaving a legacy for our children and grandchildren to pick up. So the alien from Mars coming through the door tonight would say, why on earth are you people not investing every penny you can possibly afford in your most precious resource, which is your children, to make them healthy, educated, resilient, happy children with the life skills? What do we have? We have SATs and league tables for a narrow test-based curriculum. So I do think we need to be looking seriously at what we need to do to invest in our children. Not to marry, you've said it all. As Commissioner, kids told me families matter, but they look for love, security, commitment, continuity. That is what they are craving. Replacing the state. Well, I become an avid student of the history of childhood, and I commend it to you. Go back to Victorian times when there was a population explosion, rampant destitution, prostitution for children. The plight of children was disastrous. It took a small number of social reformers who had courage to stand up and point out what society was doing for its children. They formed organizations, many of which are still present today, like the Children's Society, Barnardo's, etc., and they forced change, and they forced local communities to take responsibility for their people. And I do think that we're missing a trick here by not encouraging the development of community responsibility for people. A simple example. I don't know how many of you know about street pastors. Right? I've walked the streets between 10 o'clock at night and 4 o'clock in the morning with street pastors. They are wonderful people, in this case supported by a range of churches, not just the Anglicans, but ecumenical churches, supporting people to get on the street and meet people who are in serious difficulty. The night I was there, I think we prevented a young woman killing herself. Now, this is an example of how motivated people can come together to address a common good. So why don't we encourage the development of communities? And parishes, in my view, have got a crucially important role to play. Are they doing it?
Thank you. Let's take another cluster of questions.
Hi, I'm Alex. I work for the civil service. So I guess my question is about the interaction between parents when it comes to their preferences about what their children learn and the state. And so two forms of the question really. One is whether parents should have the right to restrict what their children learn at school, so whether they should be able to intervene on what children are taught at school, perhaps, sex education is a classic one, or maybe particular views of science. Their parents might be creationists and they wouldn't want their children taught anything other than that. And the second question is whether the state ought to have the right to intervene in what children learn in the household. So should there be particular things that parents just cannot teach their children?
Thank you very much. Could you pass it along? Oh, that's fine.
I have a question regarding taxation. So I do understand that if you use taxation for benefits, etc., that you can lower the bar for some people to participate in society. But on the other hand, I just keep on wondering if everything becomes a problem of the state, whether or not you discourage like the whole village to be responsible for the child.
Thank you. I think building on the question from before about taxation and how much the role of the state hinders or helps the community serve families.
Hi, my name is Chris. I work for an organisation called Safe Families for Children, and we basically recruit volunteers to get alongside and support families that are going through a crisis. And I guess my question for the panel is where the challenge seems to be for so many local authorities of having high looked after children number and high number of children on child protection plans, and actually they're almost the desire of the state often to step into those situations and almost leaving them to such a point of a crisis. And how can we almost create the early, trying to get into support families at an earlier stage would be my question.
Thank you. So a question about what parents can stop their children learning and what the state should be able to stop parents teaching their children. A question about taxation and the role of the state, and then a question about early intervention to prevent crisis in vulnerable families locally. And we'll begin with Alan and go this way again. Just concise answers to whichever feels most pressing to you.
Right. Okay, well, I hesitate to venture into a swamp. But it is, of course, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And there will be, I'm sure, some pretty polarized views in this room tonight about whether children have rights as individuals and what do those rights mean against the rights of parents. Well, all I can say is I have visited countries where the rights of children have a high priority and a profile. For example, in Stockholm, I visited the Swedish Parliament, and in that parliamentary building they have an office whose only function is to child-proof every aspect of emerging legislation and every budget for its impact on children. And I saw it in operation when they were looking at the design of roads. Were the roads being designed with the best interests of children in mind? So I think we need to step back from the polarity of the debate and look at what rights actually mean and how, by having a rights-based approach, everybody can benefit not just children, but families as well. And I'd be interested in your views. Early intervention is something which has a lot of currency at the moment. And I have seen it in operation. I've seen it in America, where they are investing huge amounts of time and effort and money into the most vulnerable families to try to turn around their trajectories. Some of the evidence is very, very good, others not quite so good, not least because the sustainability of working with these highly vulnerable young women, often single mothers, when they're 14, 15 and 16, how do you sustain that commitment to support them against these serious challenges they are facing in their lives of domestic violence, of abuse, of alcoholism, etc. But I do believe the philosophy of recognizing difficulties early is important. How we do it is the exam question.
I think going to the first question, I guess the state is wise to recognise parents as the primary educators of their children, but we do so within the context of safety. So I think there are some broad kind of parameters there that help guide us in the kind of scenario you paint. But I think it's where angels fear to tread, really, in terms of any more intervention that you're kind of alluding to. The gentleman for safe families, was it? Yeah. I think therein lies a challenge actually to the church to respond to its call to help those in crisis. So I think that's for me where the kind of arrow points, really. What are we doing to assist those families in need? And some incredible things happening, I think, through that organisation, from what I've heard.
Yes, just on the point of early intervention, millions has been put into a programme called Troubled Families, which I think many of you will know about. And the programmes that I know about in Westminster have failed quite miserably. And you have to ask why, because I think the one thing that's missing for me in a lot of government policy is the lack of joined up thinking. If you just attack one aspect and then some other department attacks another aspect and another, it's never going to resolve what the root causes are of the problem that you quite rightly are trying to tackle. And in terms of state intervention, I'd just like to say, first, do no harm. Because so much of the policies that I've seen that I was talking about tonight are physically actually doing harm to individuals, to families, and to children. Then on the other hand, you get a Troubled Families programme, which is not effective. So my plea to government would be, look at the root causes, start from there, work from there, and start doing some joined-up policy work and some joined-up funding, which tackles those root causes.
I mean, it's great to hear children enjoying themselves in the background, isn't it? Now, when it comes to education, philosophically and I suppose theologically, I agree. The parents are the prime educators, and the parents, I think, should have complete freedom as to how they school their child with some relatively small constraints, both in terms of what has to be taught. And until recently, until Mrs. Thatcher introduced the national curriculum, the only two subjects that were compulsory in schools were RE and PE, not even English and maths. But lo and behold, all schools did English and maths and so on. They didn't have to be told to do these things. And also relatively loose constraints in terms of what shouldn't be taught. But my life sort of touches, without being intimately involved with education at school level, in actually lots of different places. And I'm increasingly coming to the view that we need to just rethink how we school children. For a large number of children, this is just torture. That from a certain age, they go to school, they are required to go to school, they sit there and are controlled. They might or might not learn things, and actually they'd be better off combining work with education in a meaningful way. And as I say, this isn't just a sort of idea that's come out of nowhere. In lots of different parts of my life, this is sort of just struck home as an important reality. And of course, it's only for about 140 years, and only in a relatively small part of the world, that we've taken children out of the home, stratified them by age group, and sat them in a classroom for 6 hours a day, totally isolated from any other adults other than the teacher. So perhaps it's not necessarily the right thing to do and the universal solution to educating and bringing up children. Okay, taxation, everything provided by the state. Can't remember what the exact question there what was there again, but maybe just to refer to the question that was asked earlier. And one of the great social reforms of the 19th century was the development of friendly societies. So it wasn't just social action in terms of getting the state to do things, it was a development of fraternal societies which provided for people in times of need, and also provided fraternity, support, and mechanisms of training and development and so on, so that people didn't need financial support for a long period of time. 8 million people were members of friendly societies in 1900, and of course that was 8 million working men, I should say, on the whole, and their wives and families tend to be covered as well. And I think, as well as decentralisation of government policy, there needs to be a return to more fraternal vehicles for the provision of welfare as well, and this would help deal with some of the problems that have been raised in those two questions.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to take our last batch of questions, so this is your last chance. We will come to the lady at the front with the green folder. Wonderful Alison in the pink jumper, and the lady at the back in the scarf. I find myself using the word lady in these settings and feeling slightly uncomfortable with it. It's strange. Cognitive dissonance.
So this is prompted in a way by something that Philip said in your sketch of how policy...
Could you just check underneath that that's on? I think it might have possibly got turned off in the kerfuffle. No, but just project. I will summarise for those of you who can't hear.
This is prompted partly by something that Philip said at the beginning, where you sketched out how taxation policy had changed the individual away from the family and argued for a rebalancing towards the family. One of the motivations that's been at play in recent decades has been to try and achieve gender equality and I suppose the liberation of women from from structures and systems that inhibited their full development and their economic potential and all sorts of other kinds of things, which I'm sure are part of the couple relationship and part of fulfillment. In rebalancing taxation and policy towards the family, can we do it in a way that doesn't risk pinning women back into those stereotypical roles which it's been so difficult to leave aside, and which and without that full gender equality that we have painfully struggled towards, we are not going to achieve some of the other goods that the other speakers have described.
Thank you. I'm going to whiz over there.
Hello, Alison Rodwell. Recent research, and perhaps it's not so recent, but that's come to my attention, is 25% of a child's brain is developed at birth, and those first 18 months are very critical, and most of a child's life chances are determined during that critical time. And it's interesting tying in with perhaps the last question, in that bid for women's equality, perhaps we have also lost focus on what is important for the development of our children, and those stable, loving early years, and how can we ensure that we don't lose sight of that, government policy and within our communities focuses on those early years.
Thank you. And the final question at the back. If you just wait a moment, just because it'll be, I think, easier for the video recording if we have some sound being picked up. But great projection.
Alison Inglis-Jones from the Trussell Trust, where we have universal credit, where universal credit has rolled out 52% rise in the numbers of people coming to food banks. Of course, where the parishes have stepped in fact, and run food banks. All our food banks are hosted by churches. What would the panel do to tweak, change, pause universal credit?
What would the panel do to tweak, change, or pause universal credit? Great. I'm going to go to Mark, and then Kathy, and then Al and Philip to close, just to mix things up. And these will be your last thoughts that you're able to bring tonight.
I think going to Pat's kind of question about women's equality, I mean, I guess, again, I'll stick to my field, but I think there's something in this public health campaign that I would be arguing for, where we see in healthy relationships, where men actually are understanding what that looks like. I think that is good for women's equality. And so if we're to avoid kind of slipping back into some of those old kind of patterns, then I think the promotion of what a healthy relationship looks like is fundamental to the security of those gains that we've achieved. And I guess, you know, a connection with stable, loving early years for children. I mean, we know that there's a horrific graph for us parents that the moment a child is born, relationship quality drops to the floor. And we know that the job at that stage is almost containment. You know, and this is the challenge I have when it comes to government contracts, actually, because they want to see year-on-year improvement. And we try to explain that actually, if you're working with couples, particularly couples with children, then, you know, a success is holding on to the quality they may have had at that point in time. So I would say, again, working with parents, separated and together, to manage those early years is really crucial for the child's development, that they're in a safe and stable and nurturing environment. And the key to that, one of the great keys to that, is the strength of that adult relationship. The secure attachment that those adults have between each other is most beneficial for those children. And so I think that's where the focus of attention should be.
Just coming to universal credit, we need to pause. I mean, it's still being rolled out in area after area without that pause taking place, without any real listening being done to those who have suffered with it, universal credit. There's very little conversation happening with agencies like the Cardinal Hume Centre, who daily struggle alongside people to help them access universal credit, to help them get some other form of credit without going to the debt providers and getting into unpayable debt. That's not happening. It's still being rolled out. The evidence is in front of everyone's eyes of how it hasn't worked. It was a good idea. It brought together 6 different strands of benefits. It was a very complex system. It hasn't worked. Let's go back to what the original purpose was, of making it easier and better for people, not worse. And as Pat knows, I think, universal credit is paid not just in arrears, but it's paid online and to the head of household. So for women in some kind of abusive relationship, well, I leave it to your imagination of what can happen. And in fact, the welfare system totally is kind of weighted against women in the way it's applied. As the other fact, which I brought up earlier, which is something I'm passionate about, is that withdrawal of legal aid. You have rights, you don't have the wherewithal to get those rights defended, and that applies particularly in family law, and particularly when there's an abusive relationship. There's a lot we can do to put those things back, which worked for people and are no longer working for people now.
Yes, thank you. I'm so pleased you raised the issue of early years. I'm totally persuaded that the scientific evidence is so robust that it must be taken note of that what happens in the first 1001 critical days determines the life trajectories of individuals. So why is government not committed to implementing the 1001 critical days manifesto? Now, join me in Helsinki. I go to Finland to ask the question, why are you so good for children in Finland? Several answers. Top of the list was, it's our attitude, Al, to the importance of children. Our attitude to family stability. Our importance of community responsibility. So I'm in a nursery, wonderful building, and of course, Finnish children don't start formal school till they're 7. The first few years are in kindergartens where they learn through play. I talked to the staff. Every member of staff is a graduate. Most of them had master's degrees in child development or psychology. They told me they were respected for working with babies. It was a desirable profession. Only 1 in 10 was accepted for early years training. I spoke to grandparents who had enormous support for what this nursery was doing. Okay, what do we have here? We have a commitment to 20, 30, 40 hours, whatever it is, of free child care. But who's looking after those babies? I'm not knocking for one moment the early years practitioners, but we do not have a philosophy, as in Finland, that this is very important. You need well-paid, well-respected, well-educated practitioners to support children. So we have to change that philosophy. So I refer to this wonderful book again, and rush out and buy it. Here is my psychological cartoon, which points out we see the world as we have always seen it. Other people see exactly the same world with a different structure. So we have to have a paradigm shift in thinking new ways of how to deliver services and support children. And tomorrow morning, please dial up on your computers Open Democracy, and you'll find another wonderful piece written by me, which is appearing tomorrow morning, which summarizes much of what I'm saying about government attitudes, government philosophies, and the deficit in thinking between policy and practice.
Well, hello, Alison English-Jones. I saw your name on the guest list and I Googled you, and yes, it turns out that you're the very same Alison English-Jones who used to ask... Okay. Who used to ask me these difficult questions a very long time ago, but I won't say exactly how long ago. Okay. We've not come face to face since. Universal credit, I'd scrap it in a sense. It just mixes up. Two functions of the welfare system have sort of been mixed up. Originally, the welfare system was designed by Beveridge to deal with emergency problems, sickness, unemployment, and so on. And the reason why we pay national insurance contributions evaluated on a weekly or monthly basis is because these contingencies happen for a short period of time and quickly. And benefits were paid quickly, and national insurance contributions were paid on a weekly or monthly basis rather than annually as taxes. And universal credit is, of course, not. The genesis of universal credit is child tax credit and all the rest of it, which Gordon Brown sort of used and integrated with the tax system, and were actually paid to people on incomes up to £55,000 about 10 years ago, so 60-odd thousand pounds in today's terms, and were used as a sort of sophisticated tool of redistribution between people of different income levels or families of different income levels. And I think we just need to go back to designing a benefit system. We can have arguments about to what extent these things should be private, friendly society-based, and so on. But where the state is providing benefit systems, they should be appropriate to their purpose. And a benefit system which is appropriate to the purpose of providing for somebody with immediate hardship should pay benefits quickly and then withdraw them quickly when they're not needed. So I think it's just fundamentally misconceived, actually, the idea of universal credit, and it arises as a result of mixing up two functions of the tax and benefit system. Women and the tax policy. Well, at the moment, the way in which the tax and benefits system treats multi-earner households, women or a second earner, could be the man, in most circumstances it's the women, actually has an incentive to go out to work and earn money, even if the household would prefer it not to be the case. Because both members of the household have an incentive to go out and earn money up to their tax-free allowance. So the current system does skew incentives towards women going out to work when the family might prefer otherwise. I think if you move to a system which I've suggested, and which exists in many other countries in the world, where taxation was on a family basis and depended on family income, then the family would pay the same amount of tax however the income was earned, and the adults in the family could decide how they wanted to share caring responsibilities, income earning responsibilities, and so on. And I don't think we should try and socially engineer that decision. It should be a matter for families themselves.
Panellists, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Will you join me in a final round of applause for all that they've offered to us?